morning. We'll be starting off in Proverbs chapter 3 today. Start us off at verse 5. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. I warned you last week. Everybody was talking about it. We need to just go ahead and do a sermon on it. This is a passage that we know well. It's a passage that came up a lot last week, and honestly, it comes up all the time. And it's one that I think of very frequently when I'm thinking, what do I do? What path do I take? I need some wisdom in something. And it's a good reminder of God as our source of wisdom, as our source of direction. And really, that's what this whole passage is, this whole chapter is about. We're going to go through more than just that. This is written by Solomon. And what was Solomon known for? Wisdom. He had more wisdom than anyone before him or anyone after him. God came to him in a dream and said, ask whatever you want from me, and I'm going to give it to you. And he said, I want wisdom. I'm young. I'm a new king over this whole nation of your people. I want to have that godly wisdom so I can rightly lead them. And God was impressed with that, and he blessed him with wisdom and much more than wisdom. But it's the focus of a lot of his writings. He wrote Proverbs, and that's a book of wisdom. But when someone with that much wisdom tells you and not overemphasizes, but really emphasizes the importance of wisdom, it should stick out to us that's something that we should be seeking in our own lives. The wise guy says how important it is to be a wise guy. The one with wisdom says the importance of wisdom. We should maybe be seeking wisdom. And this chapter is going to break down a little bit about some conditions of gaining wisdom and some of the benefits of wisdom. And we'll start off in verse 1 here. He says, My son, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands. For length of days and long life and peace they will add to you. And now when he says do not forget my law, he's talking about God's law. In the law of their land that was given through him. But there's some conditions here. Don't forget my law, and let your heart keep my commands. Now, first off, how can we refrain from forgetting God's law unless we learn it in the first place? How can I remember something that I've never learned? So that has to be, that's an implied stepping stone there. We need to learn God's word, his law, his will. We need to, that's gaining the knowledge, and that's a beginning step to wisdom. There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge. There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge and understanding. We're going to talk a little bit about all those through here. But a lot of times we think of those as the same thing. Knowledge is someone telling me that the stove burner is hot. I have the knowledge that burner is hot. Understanding means knowing that that's a bad thing if I touch it. Wisdom is keeping my hand off of it. Because if I can have the knowledge and the understanding, but if I don't have any wisdom, I'm going to do it anyways. When he says, do not forget my law, but let your heart keep my commands, we have to remember that it's not just the outward things that we do when it comes to sin and righteousness and obedience and faithfulness. What did Jesus say? If your heart's filled with hate towards somebody, you're committing murder in your heart. You haven't actually physically killed that person, but it's still a sin that you're that way. If you were thinking the right things about the right people, the wrong things about the wrong people, that's considered committing adultery in the heart, as he said. There are, we can't control the things that pop into our head, but we can control, at least to a degree, what we dwell on and what we, if something pops in my head, a flash of anger towards somebody, I have a choice. Do I say, no, that's not how God wants me to be. I need to have a more peaceful approach about this and seek to remedy that, or do I build on it? Do I hold on to it? Because I'm letting my pride say I deserve this. I should be able to. and I let that build within me, and to the point where a hatred within me festers. And Jesus refers to that as murder of the heart. You know, when he says, let your heart keep my commands, our thoughts matter as much as our actions. And granted, we can't keep every thought under total control. A fleeting thought is one thing, but we can decide what we're going to dwell on. We can decide what we're going to internalize. And sometimes that's something that we struggle with, depending on the situation. Maybe there's somebody who really, really doesn't want us to like them. That can be a struggle with them sometimes. He says, for the result of that in verse 2, for length of days and long life and peace they will add to you by following his law, not forgetting his law, and internalizing within your heart and letting your heart keep his commands. There's a peace that comes, well, in general, with staying out of trouble, but in staying on good terms with God. You know, I have been on good terms with the law in my life, and I have been on bad terms with the law in my life. And I can tell you there's a whole lot of peace when I'm on good terms with it. And he's saying this will add peace and length of days and long life. How does length of days and long life come along with this? Well, picture in your mind the most lawless area where the most crime is, and think of, you know, does that seem like a place where there's a higher life expectancy overall or a lower one? You know, there's a lot of consequences to these things. And the beginning of wisdom is gaining knowledge and then growing and learning what to do with that knowledge. That's why he's saying, don't forget my law. Let your heart keep my commands. We need to not only learn God's word and his law and his will, but we need to internalize it. Verse 3, let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. Now this is another conditional thing, just like that. Verses 1 and 2. What does this mean? Let not mercy and truth forsake you. It's not up to me what mercy and truth try to do. That's kind of an abstract thought anyways. He's saying don't be a stranger to what's right. Don't be a stranger to truth and mercy and love. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. And when I think of binding them around your neck versus writing them on the tablet of your heart, I think of in terms of putting them on display and internalizing them. Almost like you've got a sign around your neck, putting on display, showing mercy and truth, not just internalizing it. That's important too, writing it on the tablet of your heart. We should have a desire for mercy, a desire for truth to come out. But we also need to be examples of mercy and examples of truth. It doesn't matter how much, if I'm not being truthful to people and if I'm not showing love and mercy to them, they don't care how much I believe in mercy and truth in my heart. And that's the condition, the result. In verse 4 says, and so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. And I say, well, I don't care what other people think. It's easy to get that mindset. I don't care what other people think. I don't care what they think about me. But there's different things to consider and different scenarios to consider with this. You know, I don't care what people think of me in terms of I'm not trying to impress anybody with how awesome I am. But I'm an ambassador for God. I'm putting him on display. I care what they think of him. I care what they're seeing in me about him. I care whether they see integrity in me and they see like mercy and truth. If I'm not a person who puts truth on display and that's not what they see in me, why would they think of me as anything but a liar if they've never seen truth come from me? And so, as one who is called to share God and put him on display with others and to share his love with others and to share him with others, how can I possibly say that I don't care what people think of me, if I don't care what people think at all, when I want them to think of me as a trustworthy person? Because if I'm trustworthy, there's a better chance of them believing what I have to say to them. In the sight of God and in man. And then here's our passage, our main passage. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him and he shall direct your paths. And how many times do we come back to this when we're thinking, which path do I go down? God, I need some wisdom. It might not be a physical path. It might be, what decision do I make? Do I take this job or that job? There's a million things. Every life decision comes down to wisdom, because there are results or consequences depending on which decision we make. And we have this desire to seek God because we know He's already at the finish line. So we know He knows the right solutions. We know He knows what it takes to get us to the best possible results. And so if I'm struggling and I need Him to direct my paths, and I'm struggling to get that answer, I'm struggling to find that wisdom that I need from Him so desperately at that time, I need to ask myself, have I met these conditions? I don't know what to do. Well, am I really trusting in the Lord with all my heart? Or am I not? Am I doubting? Am I not leaning on my own understanding, or is that what I'm letting me influence? Is that what I'm allowing to influence me more than anything else? Am I acknowledging Him in everything that I do, or am I only coming to Him when I need things like this? You know, we talked a lot about the lean not on your own understanding part this morning, talking about Abraham and his wife and this promised child, and how they laughed because it was so crazy to them. He was 99 and she was 89, 90 years old. And God said, you're going to have a kid. And they both laughed. They both laughed about it. It was ridiculous to them at one point, because they were looking at their own limitations. They were leaning on their own understanding. And they had been trying for quite some time. And their understanding was this was impossible. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. The more we lean on our own understanding sometimes, like in their cases, the less we're trusting with all our heart. If he was trusting in God with all his heart when he said, you and Sarah are going to have this child, he would have said, awesome, I look forward to it. But he laughed because he was leaning on his own understanding. And I got to say, there's a lot of times that we do that. There's a lot of times I do that. Even, not even necessarily consciously. I'll just catch myself thinking, there's no way that, this is going to happen, or there's no way that maybe it's a person that God may be leading me to talk to, and I may think for myself, they're not going to listen to anything I have to say. I'm leaning on the understanding of my previous interactions with that person or something. It takes a lot of, I guess in a sense, unlearning. Unlearning what this world might have taught me in my own experience apart from God, because maybe that hasn't worked, but has it worked with God? Has it worked while you were trusting in him fully? Has it worked while you were leaning on your understanding of his infinite ability rather than my own limitations? Verse 7, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Verse 7, to some degree or another, is a really hard thing for a lot of people to do, especially in this day and age. A lot of people are wise in their own eyes. They think they know something so much that they are just not willing to consider that maybe they're even a little wrong. And I'm sure there are things within me that I've thought that. I know there are things within me that I've thought that, and I've learned otherwise since. But sometimes it's easy to think, no, I know this. That's nonsense. It's hard to let go of something that we've been so deeply convinced of. But sometimes we have to let go of that. We have to be teachable. That doesn't mean that if I've got convictions about godly truths that I'm compromising on those. I'm not saying that by any means. But there are a lot of things in life that we learn more about as we go. How much do we think we know everything when we're teenagers? We're being wise in our own eyes. We are so sure, and there's no doubt. Not that we specifically know everything, but we know about as much as we're ever going to know. We might pick up a handful of things along the way, but there's just so much more that you learn as you get older and mature. There are so many more biblical truths that we learn the more we mature in the faith. We need to be careful not to get to a certain point. It's not just a matter of, when I talk about being wise in your own eyes, it's not just a matter of thinking, I know this and anything contrary to that is a lie. Sometimes it can be, well, I know all there is to know about this. I will never say I know everything there is to know about God's Word. There is always, if I think I've figured it all out, I need to start over because I don't know anything. We need to be teachable. We need to be willing to accept correction and instruction when something conflicts with what we have a deep-seated belief in. But it's interesting to think about where he says, it will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. Fear the Lord and depart from evil. It will be health to your flesh and strength to your bones. That's not just a metaphor. There are literal physical implications to our thoughts and our actions and our emotions. And, God calls us to, away from anger. He calls us away from hatred. He calls us away from fear. He calls us into forgiveness. And when we don't obey that and we do the opposite, it builds stresses, it builds anxieties, it builds a lot of inner turmoil. What does that do in your stomach? Does it feel better? Or does it feel like there's a knot in there sometimes? Does that have other health implications on you? Have you ever seen someone in a total fit of rage lead into a heart attack? Do you think they would be less likely to if they were in a state of peace? The thoughts and the feelings and the way that we express those, and they can have direct physical impacts on us and our health, and in sicknesses. David talked in Psalm 32. He said, "Blessed is he whose transgression is forgiven, whose sin is covered. Blessed is the man whom the Lord does not impute iniquity, and in whose spirit there is no deceit. When I kept silent, my bones grew old through my groaning all the day long. For day and night your hand was heavy upon me. My vitality was turned into the drought of summer. I acknowledged my sin to you, and my iniquity I have not hidden. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin." What's he talking about here? He's talking about that time when he had that affair with Bathsheba and then had her husband killed, and he kept his mouth shut about it, and he held it within, and it started having physical implications on him. What did he say? When I kept silent. That's what he's talking about before he sought forgiveness, before he brought some resolution from that. When I kept silent, I did those things, and I was just holding it in. My bones grew old. I was groaning all day long. I felt God's hand heavy upon me, and my vitality was turned into the drought of summer. It ate away at him inside. It made him not just mentally and emotionally weak, it made him physically weak and miserable. Verse 9, "Honor the Lord with your possessions and the first fruits of all your increase. So your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine." This is another conditional thing. And this, at first glance, it looks like this is just talking about, your offerings and things like that. But it goes beyond that. When he says, honor the Lord with your possessions, it's really talking about good stewardship with what God's blessed you with. That might not be giving it to a charity or a church or something like that in all cases. Sometimes it's just doing good with what you have. If let's say I have trying to think of a modern example. Okay, smartphone is a possession. I get on Facebook. I can honor God with that possession by behaving in a biblical manner on social media, by sharing biblical truths on social media, things like that. Whereas I could post a lot of things that are very ungodly, and that would be dishonoring God with the possession. There are a lot of examples of things that we could use. It might be something as simple as giving somebody a ride with your car versus hitting them with your car. You know what I mean? You can honor or dishonor God with a possession. Okay, hitting them with your car intentionally. I don't want to single out anybody who's done it accidentally. Follow the laughter, you'll know who I'm talking about. But this was probably kind of personal to Solomon too, because he says, and with the first fruits of all your increase, so your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. This is also talking about offerings. It's also talking about sacrifices, because something that a lot of people forget about Solomon's story and God coming to him and offering to give him whatever he wanted, well, what was God doing that in response to? Right before God came to him and said, ask me whatever you want and I'll give it to you, and he said, I'll take the wisdom. Right before that, Solomon went out and made 1,000 burnt offerings to God. They didn't have a temple. They didn't have a church. They had the high places from the pagan worship that was there before, but they didn't have his temple yet. But he went up and he made offerings to God. He made 1,000 offerings to God. And this isn't, and God went beyond what he asked for. He could have just gone up and said, God, I want to be the richest guy who ever lived, and I want to be left alone by everybody. He said, God, I want a private island and everything I'll need forever. He said, no, I want wisdom because I want to lead your people rightly. And God saw the selflessness in that, because his desire, that was beneficial to him having that wisdom, but his desire was to benefit God and to benefit God's people. It was a selfless act. That in itself was a sacrifice, aside from the 1,000 burnt offerings that were sacrificed. And God not only gave him that wisdom, he didn't ask to have more wisdom than anybody who ever lived, but that's what he got. God gave him back way more than he offered. And he went beyond that, and he gave him more power and wealth than any other king in history. You know, and this isn't saying throw as much as you can into an offering plate and God's going to make you rich. I'm not saying that. That's stupid. That's that prosperity gospel stuff. But God is, when we're willing to be sacrificial, when we're willing to honor God with our possessions, as he said, when we're willing to let go of things, or it doesn't necessarily even have to be possessions. He let go of an opportunity to be selfish. When we're really showing a selflessness and trying to honor God with what we have, he's going to bless us. He's going to take care of us, and it's going to often be in ways that we don't expect. It might be, you know, your barns overflowing with plenty. It might be your vats overflowing with new wine. It might be, you know, a financial blessing. It might be more peace than you've ever experienced in your life. It might be a bunch of broken relationships with people from your past. It could be a lot of things. But the point is, we can't outgive God, as they say. When we trust him, and that's what this is. When they would give that first fruit of their increase, you know, when you're that farmer and you're living off of those things, it could be easy to say, no, I need to make sure I set this aside for myself. I need to set the best aside for myself, or I can make the most money off of this best stuff if I sell it rather than the other stuff. When you're willing to say, no, I'm going to trust God. He's the one that provided all this in the first place. When I'm going to trust him with it, he's going to. I'm trusting also that he's going to meet my needs and he's going to care for me. And I've experienced that in a lot of different types of scenarios throughout my life, and I know that we all have through some of the stories that we've shared. But we need to trust in him with everything we have. It's his anyways. Verse 11, my son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor detest his correction. For whom the Lord loves, he corrects, just as a father the son in whom he delights. Yeah, this is one that we know, it's a well-known passage about God's chastening, his correction. He does it out of love, just as a parent does out of love. Just as a parent ought to out of love. You know, I'm not talking about one who finds joy in beating their kids or something, but when you're punishing a child, it's hard for them to see anything but something bad is happening to me. Just like when God is chastening us sometimes. It's hard to see as anything but that. But look at it from an adult perspective towards that child. You're punishing them to keep them from something worse. And that's often what God's doing with us. He may be pulling us from a situation that would lead us down the wrong path further and further if we stayed on it. It's something that seems bad in the moment. We might look at it a blessing if we knew what the alternative was. If we knew what was in store if God didn't step in and bring correction. And this is a big part in the steps of gaining wisdom is being corrected. What's one of the most well-known passages on wisdom in the Bible is the parable of the man who built his house on the sand and the one who built his house on the rock. The foolish person built his house on the sand, and it didn't last. The wise person built it on the rock, and it did last. Well, sometimes I wonder if that guy who built his house on the rock built his first house on the sand and learned a lesson. Because that's how I've gained a lot of my wisdom, is doing the stupid thing first. And then trying to, learning from that. And that's part of wisdom, is we get through the mistakes and we don't make them again. Or we do something in an attempt to not make the same mistake. And sometimes that takes a failure or two and finding a better way to do it next time. Sometimes that takes God's correction. So these are some of the steps to gaining wisdom. Going back through here, internalizing and remembering God's law, being an example internally and externally of mercy and truth, fully trusting in God, not being wise in our own eyes, honoring God with our possessions, accepting his chastening. And then it goes on to explain a lot of the benefits of wisdom. I mean, it should be obvious that wisdom is a valuable thing. He said, starting in verse 13, "Happy is the man who finds wisdom and the man who gains understanding. For her proceeds are better than the profits of silver, and her gain than fine gold. She is more precious than rubies, and all the things you may desire cannot compare with her. Length of days is in her right hand, and in her left hand riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is like a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her." In talking about the joy that can be found in wisdom, he's comparing it to how much better it is than great wealth. It can make you so much happier than the profits of silver and gold and rubies and all the things that you can desire. They can't compare with wisdom. Now, is this saying if you're rich, it's impossible for you to be happy and it's a bad thing? No. He's saying wisdom can bring a greater joy and a greater peace. If I am suffering from a massive depression, I don't care how much money you throw at me, it's not going to fix it. And there are things that we can gain with money, with wealth. There are things that we can do with it that can't compare to the joy that can be found in wisdom. And look at how he describes it, beginning of verse 17. "Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who take hold of her, and happy are all who retain her." And now, what are those things? Those sound like things that a lot of people think they're going to gain from wealth. Now, if I've got this wealth, I can take it and I can buy a beautiful home. But it can't put within that home ways of pleasantness, ways of peace, happiness, life. That comes with wisdom and the relationships that we develop in that wisdom. They say money can't buy happiness, and some people are like, yeah, but it can buy a jet ski, or it can buy this or that. That'll make you happy. And when you're suffering from a lack of happiness, those things are band-aids. There's nothing wrong with those things, and they can be fun and awesome, but there are greater ways to peace. There are greater ways to happiness. Whether we have a lot or a little, if we've got God and we've got wisdom and we're in a close relationship with Him, there should be a peace within us that goes beyond what we can get from any of those things. 19, the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the depths were broken up and clouds dropped down on the dew. God created the earth in wisdom. It stands to reason that we should live in this earth in wisdom. You know, we're made in his image. And if we want to develop that image and develop our conformity to the image of Christ as we're called to do, think of the massive amount of wisdom God has, and why would we not seek to follow that example and to gain wisdom? You know, I had a lot of times of happiness and a lot of times of fun and a lot of, bought different things and whatever throughout my early life, and it wasn't really until about the last 10 years that I really started seeking wisdom more than those kinds of things, seeking a lot of wisdom, seeking godly wisdom, seeking wisdom about a lot of things in my life. And if there's one thing that I've learned from that wisdom is I wish it was a goal a lot sooner, because a lot of the biggest things I wish I could change in my life would have been avoided with the right wisdom. They were done without wisdom. Verse 21, my son, let them not depart from your eyes. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, so they will be life to your soul and grace to your neck. Then you will walk safely in your way, and your foot will not stumble. When you lie down, you will not be afraid. Yes, you will lie down, and your sleep will be sweet. Doesn't that sound amazing? Doesn't that sound just peaceful to a weary soul? Just the idea of having life to your soul, walking safely in your way, not stumbling in what you do, not having, when you lie down, not being afraid. How often do people lie in bed at night and worry about things? Yes, you will lie down and your sleep will be sweet. And when I thought about the parable of the man who built the house on the rock and the house on the sand, and I was thinking of modern examples of that in wisdom in building or buying a house. And if we're not using wisdom, we might make common mistakes, like not having the pipes tested for lead, or not having the walls tested for mold, or not, checking to see that the structure doesn't have termites. Or maybe looking at a house that I can afford the payments, but not having the wisdom to see that I can't afford the house itself. I could squeeze that in, but it's going to be for the next 300 years. And in wisdom, we might be really careful with the things that we're looking into purchasing, like that house. In wisdom, we might say, I'm going to live below my means, so that way it's a lot more doable. In wisdom, we might say, wow, we did check this out, and we're not getting it because it does have termites, and it does have lead everywhere, and it does have mold everywhere. But we need to do the same with our own lives. If we have wisdom, we're going to examine our own lives. If we have wisdom, we're going to put ourselves to the test and look to see what's wrong. Look to see what needs remodeled. Maybe something needs gutted, maybe something needs updated. But the more we seek that wisdom, the more we're going to understand things like that. The more we're going to understand what brings true peace and happiness, what brings us closer to God, and what pushes us away from Him. It's not just the knowledge, it's putting it into action. It talks about knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. You got to get to that wisdom part before you're putting it into action and you're making the right decisions. Are we examining ourselves in wisdom? Are we examining ourselves that we are in God's will, that we are following His law as He calls to at the beginning, not forgetting His law and keeping His commands? Are we examining ourselves to know that we are in the faith at all, to know that we do have Christ as a Savior and heaven as a home, Those are things that we need to evaluate in ourselves. And as we grow and as we mature and as we get the wisdom to make those right choices, we're going to start veering back to that right path with God.